Thank you. A couple of preliminary observations. Dr. DeBar, please apply artificial intelligence to the scheduling of Senate hearings. We're all supposed to be 2 or 3 places at once, and none of us have managed to do it. And I just want to follow up on the comment of Senator Heinrich. He mentioned we're now at about 400 plus parts per million in carbon in the atmosphere. The last time we were there was 3.6 million years ago, and the average temperature in the Arctic was 60 degrees. So that just gives you a flavor of where we are. I mean, that we're in a totally uncharted territory now, and I do think it's urgent. Secretary Moniz, it's wonderful to see you. As a fellow New Englander, I'm sure you're glad as I am that the Patriots ended the terrible 3-month drought in World Championships that we've had.
I was there.
Since the Red Sox won in November, so it's been tough, but we made it through.
Celtics are coming out.
Mr. Grumman,
Senator Cantwell, you're recognized.
So I just couldn't resist. Moonshot has been used a number of times, and I think it's fascinating that the origin of that term is the Apollo program, and the key to it was Kennedy saying we're going to do it in 10 years. The other example of the government is, I think it was Lyndon Johnson said we're going to get a train from Washington to New York in 3 hours. A concrete goal is what made those two things happen. How do we, what should be our concrete goal in energy? And I don't think 10 years is realistic, but shouldn't there be some number? Because otherwise we don't have anything to shoot at. If you're going to do a moonshot, you got to know what it is, where you want to land.
So I'm gonna give you a few suggestions. I want to turn it over to Jay, who's also talked about this a lot. You know, there is an intellectual sequence to get there. The first thing we have to do is decide what the problem is.
Exactly.
Once we decide what the problem is, then we have to have a general kind of philosophical sense of how we want to approach it. And I think most people on this panel would say a performance standard, a zero carbon, a low carbon, as opposed to a particular technology. And then you have to do something a little harder, which is to look at the world and say, these are the 8 things that seem like they might get us there, right? This idea that after just saying we want a performance standard, Congress or the administration just kind of steps back and just, things don't just happen.
Right.
And so, you know, I think there are a lot of different ways to slice this. Because I'm not nearly as sophisticated as the secretary, think about it from in terms of technology, that there's a critical opportunity around nuclear, and we could set a real clear goal.
Nuclear storage, carbon capture,
exactly.
Hydrogen.
If this committee were interested in having a discussion about what those kinds of goals could be and what would be the processes along the way that we could allow ourselves to...
And if we don't set them, somebody's going to set them, and they'll be set sort of randomly according to the... And I think this is a matter of public policy. Let me follow up, Mr. Faison. You talked. I think you had a really good insight that a molecule of CO2 released anywhere in the world has the same impact. Why did we leave the Paris Accord, which wasn't a binding treaty, but at least it was the first real international effort to acknowledge the problem and to deal with it? Because we could do everything in the world here in the U.S. We could lower our output by 50% or 90%, and as you pointed out, wouldn't matter because China and India are still pumping CO2 out in record amounts. So don't we need some international, isn't this an essential part of the dealing with this issue?
Well, I'm for the Paris Agreement. Fortunately, we're kind of like artillery officers where we focus on the target rather than stuff going on around us.
But part of the target has to be international, doesn't it?
I agree. I see there are 2 things to that. Yes, I'm for Paris. I'm for standards. I'm for this government setting, making this a priority and setting ambitious goals. Goals are at the very top of our agenda. However, if we put standards in place, for example, is Nigeria going to follow them? There are a lot of countries in the world, Indonesia, India, China may, but I think in order to achieve the kind of decarbonization that we need, we have to deliver the next set of affordable and clean technologies that we can export everywhere.
I totally agree with that, but there do have to be standards, and we have to realize that this is a global problem. It's not a New England problem or a U.S.
Correct.
problem. Thank you. Secretary Moniz, just in a few seconds, if you were going to advise us, what should be the top 5 priorities for federal R&D on energy?
If I may take the liberty of a brief comment on the global issue, absolutely, but I think there's also an understanding that there will be kind of tiers of compliance in a time frame with the industrialized nations, which is where most of the emissions are today, needing to lead, the emerging economies maybe a little bit behind, and certainly the less developed countries behind as well. So I think that's a clear pathway going forward. In terms of the areas, well, again, in our analysis, from over 100 technologies, initially we came down to 10 areas that we feel are ones that are underfunded and have great breakthrough potential, and those were storage writ broadly, many time scales, advanced nuclear, a set of technologies that can serve multiple sectors like hydrogen, like advanced manufacturing, which Senator Stabenow mentioned earlier, the grid modernization, and something we haven't mentioned today, but integrating all of those platform technologies into the grid and into so-called smart cities, which is also a way of bringing new services to consumers. But that's an area where the new players, like the big data companies, Senator Cantwell has a few near her, and the energy incumbents must find a way of using their skill sets cooperatively. And finally, a set of these deep decarbonization, large-scale carbon management issues, many of which we've talked about today, and I would just repeat, the whole suite of carbon capture, utilization and sequestration technologies to new things, including new things in a sense that it happens in nature, but it doesn't happen at the scale to accelerate things like biological sequestration. Literally, perhaps engineering plants with much deeper root systems, for example, to fix carbon dioxide. So that was kind of a suite that we would emphasize.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.